A 6-year-old stabbed, 3 college students shot.
Whether or not this is a hate crime by the law, it was a hateful act.
Palestinian communities on edge.
People are afraid. I'm afraid to leave my house.
As the Israel-Hamas war fuels divisions right here at home over identity, belief, and bias.
You're a terrorist. You support terrorism.
Creating fear as Americans hope to keep faith.
This is an NBC News special, Fear and Faith, Palestinians in America. Reporting tonight, Zincle Esemwa.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We've seen disturbing violence and harassment against Palestinians, Muslims, and other Americans of Arab descent. Most recently, 3 college students of Palestinian descent were attacked walking down the street in Vermont. We'll speak with one of them in just a moment. But you see, that's just one of several incidents raising concerns across the country since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Since then, experts and advocacy groups say Palestinian Americans are under threat. Threats also impacting other Arab Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, and people perceived to be in these communities. As of 2023, there are an estimated 3.7 million people of Arab descent in the United States, over 4 million who identify as Muslim, with over 143,000 Palestinian Americans. Of course, no community is a monolith, but the recent spate of violence in the United States is distinct. Advocacy groups are comparing the hate scene today to the fallout from 9/11 or the so-called Muslim travel ban of 2017. The uptick in violence is so concerning, the White House created its first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia in November. We'll discuss all of this tonight, and we do want to warn you, some of the language and images you'll see are disturbing. It's hard, it's heavy, but we believe these conversations are also necessary, particularly at a moment like this. So we begin with Stephanie Gosk with a closer look at incidents spreading hate and fear in America.
The Israel-Hamas war is half a world away. But for Palestinians and other Americans of Arab descent, it's having a dangerous ripple effect here at home.
There is no question this was a hateful act.
3 Palestinian college students, Hisham Awartani visiting his family for Thanksgiving, along with friends Tassin Ali Ahmad and Kenan Abdelhamid, were attacked in Burlington, Vermont.
They were walking down this street speaking Arabic and wearing keffiyehs, traditional Arab scarves, according to the family. That's when police say a man in a hoodie approached them and, without saying a word, fired off at least 4 rounds.
If they were not wearing the keffiyeh, right, if they were not speaking Arabic, I seriously cannot understand in any logical sense why he would pull out a gun and shoot. I was and am incredibly angry that I feel like there's nowhere safe for Palestinians. I literally don't know where to go with my son.
The suspect is charged with second-degree attempted murder, but has not been charged with a hate crime. Police say they're still investigating.
It's very likely that he won't be able to walk again.
Hisham's parents spoke with NBC's Erin McLaughlin at their home in the West Bank.
It was a vicious crime, and it will change my son's life.
Forever.
Forever.
The violence is not limited to those young men. In Illinois, a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy was stabbed to death in his home by his landlord in October. Police calling it an anti-Muslim hate crime. The landlord pleaded not guilty.
He was a child filled with love and not any hate.
And at Stanford, authorities say an Arab Muslim student was struck in a hit and run that's being investigated as a hate crime. But it's not just violence. Harassment is on the rise, too.
We killed 4,000 Palestinian kids. You know what? It wasn't enough.
This man was charged with a hate crime for stalking after verbally abusing a food cart vendor in New York. He said it started as small talk. This Brooklyn woman was charged with hate crimes after allegedly throwing hot coffee and yelling slurs at a man of Indian descent who was wearing a keffiyeh. She pleaded not guilty.
You and your son go away.
And at this confrontation at the University of Texas at Austin, 3 men taunted Muslim students organizing a pro-Palestinian event.
I'm just saying you are terrorists. That's it.
Incidents like these, all part of a surge in Islamophobia since the war between Israel and Hamas began, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations, including statements that conflate all Palestinian people and their supporters with Hamas terrorists.
There are very few innocent Palestinian civilians.
And I don't like how people tried to differentiate between the Palestinians and Hamas.
Experts say rhetoric like that sends a message.
They're all being equated with terrorism.
Palestinian-American Amani Jamal is the Dean of International Affairs at Princeton. She went to the same high school in the West Bank as the 3 young men who were shot in Vermont.
These students are me 30 years ago. And our dream was to come to the United States to get an education so that we could live a life of dignity and freedom.
A common goal that hatred and divisiveness are making harder to achieve. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, Burlington, Vermont.
A dream to live in the United States for education and freedom deferred by violence. Stephanie, thank you for that report. And I'm joined now by Abed Ayoub, National Executive Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Also with me, Dalia Fahmy, Associate Professor of Political Science at Long Island University. Dean Obidallah, lawyer and host of SiriusXM's The Dean Obidallah Show. And Neda Alan-Uti, Executive Director of Mgage, Michigan. Thank you all so much for joining me, especially at a time like this. Abed, I want to jump in and start with you because you are actually working closely with the families of those 3 men who were shot in Vermont. In your closed-door conversations with these families, what have you seen of their experiences? I understand specifically the Vermont families are calling for this to be designated as a hate crime, right?
Correct, and thank you for having this important conversation. The families are shocked, as many Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim Americans in the country currently are. And there is a need and a want for them to push for hate crimes charges and to get an understanding of why this happened. Overall, I mean, the families are shocked. The parents are shocked. There's a disbelief. They're finally now back, here in the U.S., reunited with their children. And now the process of healing physically, mentally, that process now begins. And that's going to be a long road of recovery ahead.
Is there any justice that can be had in a situation like this?
Justice in a situation like this, it's difficult to quantify what justice means. And getting the hate crimes charges, changing the rhetoric around the way Palestinians and Arabs are looked at in this country, that can contribute to it. Now, try to define justice to a mother who lost her 6-year-old child, to a stabbing, she's going to have a different answer. But I think what we can start with is the changing of the rhetoric and the changing of the way we're looking at Palestinians and Arabs in this country.
Yeah, and I want to dig into rhetoric with you, Dean. You host a talk show. You're a comedian. You face your own share of pretty public harassment. You were falsely accused of being the mastermind behind a 27 terror attack in the UK at a pop concert that left 22 people dead. That accusation came from a neo-Nazi website and was false. So talk to me about stigmas, beliefs, words, and at times lies that are often used to characterize the experience of your community, noting, of course, that no group is one-dimensional.
That incident that I lived through was actually relevant today. That actually happened in 2017. It was neo-Nazis at the Daily Stormer who fabricated tweets in my name saying I was involved in a terrorist attack because I had criticized in articles Donald Trump and his failure to condemn white supremacy. This is before Charlottesville. And they wanted to silence me. And right now we are seeing a similar thing where you see certain people on the right and even a few on the left trying to silence those who are advocating for Palestinian humanity, accusing us of being pro-terrorist, accusing us of wanting to see death of Israeli civilians. This is despicable. We are just fighting for the humanity of the Palestinian people, like so many other communities that join with us. And the efforts to silence Palestinian voices this time is unlike anything I've ever seen. I've never seen more of a coordinated effort to try to silence us.
Dean, briefly, I'm struck that you say you haven't seen anything like this since 9/11, since the so-called anti-Muslim ban, or you're saying ever?
I think this is different in a way. Right after 9/11, we were shocked. As all Americans were living here, we had no idea what to make of it. There was a backlash against Muslims. It did die down over time. Then it manifested beneath the surface. Then it manifested again with Donald Trump calling for the Muslim ban. Now we are seeing some communities join with us, but some of our allies that I thought were our allies are not with us.
That's interesting.
And they are even sort of supported the chorus, demonizing us, somehow being pro-Hamas, when we're just speaking out for Palestinian humanity.
As this war has progressed, we've heard a lot about generational trauma, right? We saw the stabbing of that 6-year-old, but I understand even you have had some pretty terrifying encounters with your own child. Can you talk to me about that?
Unfortunately, yes. My son and I were unfortunately one of those, where
I live in a community, a university community, where we were gathering food for our local food bank. And someone was not happy to see someone that looks like me in our neighborhood and proceeded to almost run my son and I off the parking lot while we were actually putting food in the food bank, collecting food for the food bank. But this is different. According to the Council on American Islamic Relations, within the first week, we saw 1,283 acts of anti-Muslim hate. We have rhetoric today within the Republican primary candidates of Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley and Governor DeSantis and even former President Trump talking about Palestinians as not going back to those archetypal tropes of anti-Arab, anti-Muslim sentiment of that these people do not belong in this country. The former president said the next Muslim ban will be unprecedented. And so we're at a critical moment, which is unlike 9/11, because 9/11 didn't result immediately into rhetoric.
People see incidents like Vermont, right? Or they hear about that moment with Dahlia in the parking lot, and it may feel extreme. But this is not an anomaly, right? Data disagrees. As we heard from Steph's piece, the Council on American Islamic Relations cites a 216% increase in complaints from the community. And if you look closer, this is the breakdown, right? Reported free speech violations, employment discrimination, hate crimes, and bullying. So my question is, after looking at all those numbers, the data, the scope of what's happening in this country, this has been happening long before this moment, right?
Absolutely, but we also see a heightened amount of hate crimes since October 7th. Right now, it's very reminiscent of 9/11 for us, and it's very reminiscent of life under the Trump administration. When we elected Biden in 2020, we felt we were going to elect a president who's going to protect us, who's going to stand with us, and who's going to truly represent us. But now the Muslim community as a whole feel very betrayed. And even in my hometown in Dearborn, Michigan, with the largest population of Arab and Muslims, we still feel unsafe. Right now, we had the mayor increase security for our mosques and our schools. Again, this is one of the largest populations of Arab and Muslims in the country. There's a lot of fear within our community, especially when you see the Biden administration calling a ceasefire disgraceful, especially when you see them, the president himself lying about seeing beheaded babies, or even questioning the death toll of Palestinians killed in Gaza. This is all dehumanizing rhetoric that led to the hate crimes we see today.
I know you've led efforts, as you mentioned, for Joe Biden, for Rashida Tlaib. She was the first Muslim woman to serve in the Michigan state legislature. So is this just a brief moment of dissatisfaction from this voting bloc, or could this be a larger movement that could cost the administration the election?
Absolutely. This is not just a moment. The community feels very betrayed, very hurt from the Biden administration. And again, people always tell us, well, we have 1 year for the community to change their minds. And I respond to saying that we have 1 year for politicians to get their act together. Right now, we have about 15,000 Palestinians dead in Gaza, 6,000 of which are children. Come 2024, our Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian communities will not forget. And you will remember this on the ballot in 2024.
Now I have family in Palestine who's afraid for their lives, and Biden is doing nothing to stop it. I'm hurt for the betrayal that we feel from Biden, but I also feel like a little bit of guilt for what I've done.
They said that we had to save America from Donald Trump, and now we feel that we have to save Palestine from Joe Biden.
Dahlia, let me ask you, as our political scientist here, if not Biden, where does this voting bloc go? Do they go to Trump, the current GOP frontrunner, who also initiated that so-called anti-Muslim ban?
So what we saw in the 2020 election is that in the 5 key swing states, Muslims became the heart of the Democratic Party. And the question today is, with the dissatisfaction of Muslims and Arabs with the current administration and with the DNC, is how are they going to acclimate to this? Is the rhetoric going to change? We see that President Biden's language has shifted a bit, but is it enough to actually capture the heart of what is the Democratic Party in 5 swing states? Will they go towards the Republican Party? It's not clear that they will. That could be a political strategy to keep Democrats in power going down the ticket, but to punish the president for not standing with the people who put him into office in those 5 key swing states.
We saw the Biden administration establishing the first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia, but you've said that the Biden administration's response is still falling short. Can you expand on that for us?
The response is still falling short, well, for a number of reasons. One, there needs to be an immediate call for a ceasefire and an end to the war on Gaza and the genocide that's happening to Palestinians right now. And without that, that's the #1 community ask. And 2, the countering Islamophobia. So we can't continue down this road in using language that erases the Arab and the impact on the Arab and the Palestinian community. That's very important. The administration needs to change that, needs to change the way it's speaking about the community.
Yeah.
And needs to call out and push back on elected officials from within the Democratic Party and other parties that are using dehumanizing language, that are equating, Palestinians with terror or equating all Arabs as terrorists. These are battles that we fought decades ago that are now coming back.
Thank you. And all of you are touching on the fact that words matter, right? So, Dean, I want to end with you because you host a talk show, and it feels like the language elected officials use right now really, really matters. Yet we still have not all fully agreed on what language to use. So what do voters and members of this community need to be hearing right now?
I think part of it is a sense of empathy and support for our community. And it's got to be more than a policy position on, like, we're going to combat anti-Muslim bigotry. Well, you should have been combating that before. That should be a given. Our community is more active than ever. We're not going to check out and leave. We're going to just be more demanding on elected officials. And I'm so glad the community is doing that because other communities have done that. And that's how you make elected officials be more responsive. So I think it's great our community is pressing the President Biden administration to be more responsive. Every other community's done that. It's just our time now to do the same thing.
Well, Dean, Abed, Dalia, and Neda, I thank you all so much for sharing your insights with us, especially at a time like this. Thank you. Stay safe and stay well. We really appreciate it. Coming up, we'll bring you my one-on-one conversation with Kinan Abdalhamid, one of the students shot in that Burlington, Vermont attack. Stay with us. Welcome back. The shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent in Vermont has been a sobering reminder of how dangerous this moment really is. Kinan Abdalhamid is one of the 3 students who was shot in Burlington, Vermont. He's now out of the hospital and joins me now. Kinan, thank you so much for being with me. First off, I just want to ask, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. Honestly, I haven't been focusing much on myself. They just ended the humanitarian pause, and I've been focusing on my people dying. Both in the West Bank and Gaza. So that is really where my mind has been most of the time.
No, that's incredibly understandable, especially given what you experienced. And I do want to spend a moment talking about what happened. So I understand you and your friends had actually gone on walks in the days before the shooting, I think actually on the same street where it happened. Can you talk to me about what happened that day?
We walked around the block, and on the way back, across the sidewalk, we see this man standing on his porch, looking away. He turned around, and as soon as he saw us, he ran down the steps, pulled out a pistol, and started shooting. He first shot my friend Tahsin, which I soon heard the thud of his body on the ground and him start screaming. And that was my signal to run. Then I soon heard another pistol shot while running hit Hisham, and his stud hit the floor. And I hid behind the backyard of a random house for about like a minute or 2. When I sat down, I noticed a sharp pain on my backside, so I kind of put my hand behind my back. I looked at my hand after, and it was soaked in blood. That's when I was like, oh, I was shot as well.
I understand you and your friends were actually speaking Arabic and English when this happened. You were also wearing a traditional scarf, typically affiliated with your community. What were you talking about? And had you all discussed the potential that it may have made you a target, either speaking in Arabic or wearing the scarf? Had that occurred to you in this climate?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, when we all met in the hospital, we were like, why do you think it happened? Like, oh yeah, probably because we're speaking Arabic.
You said that to each other.
There was just no, yeah, we didn't even discuss it. It was just like an instant conclusion because we can't think of anything else. Regarding what we were talking about, I think, doing homework because we haven't done enough work during Thanksgiving break.
And I mean, I understand your parents your mother specifically has spoken out, talking about having you in the U.S. for safety, and yet this still happened. Did you ever think anything like this could happen on American soil?
I certainly hope not. I have heard of other Palestinians being beat up, stabbed, or humiliated. But I certainly didn't expect to be shot, and there's a difference between like intellectually knowing it and firsthand experiencing it, or close people around you experiencing it.
How did it feel when you learned that Hisham may lose the ability to walk?
That was extremely hurtful because Hisham's probably the nicest person I know, and if anyone's deserving of that, it's definitely not him.
A lot of your fellow college students have been speaking out since the three of you were shot. And some of them said, one in particular at Brown, which I know one of your friends attended, said, it's tragic that it took a university student in the United States to get shot to really listen. You have even said that you didn't expect a story about someone of Palestinian descent getting shot to go so far. And I see you smiling now. Why?
Because that's really, really true. There's definitely a very strong systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, which is not done by accident.
Talk to me more about that. What do you mean?
So essentially, university administrators, anyone that has a loud voice, has done a very bad job of protecting not only Palestinian students, but pro-Palestinian students, as well as even pro-Palestinian Jewish individuals.
And I'm reminded, you grew up in the West Bank, but came here to the United States for your studies. Your mother has said she wanted you to come here because she felt it was safer. Based on what happened to you and your friends, what do you think that says about the experience of Palestinians in America today?
I think it says that there should be a lot more attention to the protection of not only Palestinians, but Arabs in general.
And Kenan, I want to end by asking you, you've said you don't feel the experience of Palestinians is fairly or fully represented or reflected in our country. So what is your message to Americans tonight? What do you want them to understand about what's happened to you and what's going on with your community?
It's really important to see Palestinians as a diverse population like any other race or ethnicity. I mean, we all have our own independent ideas and thoughts, and Palestinians aren't Muslim. They're Muslim, Christian. There's even Palestinian Jewish individuals and Palestinian atheists, Palestinian agnostic. Like, we're just a people like any other. I encourage everyone to look into reliable sources about what's happening, the history of the region, also before saying an opinion, especially people in power.
Kenan, those are really powerful points, and I appreciate you making them, especially as you're healing and your friends still are. So thank you so much for making the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.